Hello, hello. I'm Danita Jones. My family calls me civic-minded Jones, and today I have the honor of speaking with Rochelle Newman-Carrasco. She likes to say that she was born on a small island near Puerto Rico called Manhattan. She is a pioneering voice in U.S. Latino and culture and cross-cultural marketing. With over 4 decades of experience, she has shaped cultural storytelling and strategy, working with major brands like Lexus, Procter and Gamble, and Warner Brothers. A thought leader, she has held board roles with the Association of Hispanic Ad Agencies, Florida State University Center for Hispanic Communications, and committee roles with ANA's AIM, and others. So let's welcome Rochelle. So happy to
Hey,
have you here.
I am so delighted to be here. Thank you so much for including me in this important conversation. I'm really excited to answer some questions and get into conversation and dialogue on some very important subjects.
Great. I'm so looking forward to diving in. But first of all, I would like to know, why do you do this work? Why is it important to you?
Well, let's see. I'll just take you back to childhood because I had the good fortune of being raised on as you said in my bio, on a small island near Puerto Rico called Manhattan, but specifically an area of Manhattan called the Lower East Side, which is really, and that's even lower and easter than the alphabet city, than the Avenue A's and B's and C's, and the history of that area is children of immigrants and the African American community, the Puerto Rican during my generation, the Puerto Rican community, the Jewish community, Eastern European Jews, which are my ancestry, Chinatown, Little Italy, the Irish before the Irish were considered white. Because there's a whole evolution. The Jews weren't always considered white. The Italians weren't always considered white. So we were children who well, I went to public school. And so it's important work to me going back to the fact that it's simply just how I was raised to have respect and communication and know that I'm interconnected with everybody that, we all, it's important for us to all understand each other. And so that upbringing, before there were words like diversity, equity, inclusion, we were just children who understood. And of course, not every family had the same worldview, but my parents were particularly interested in my being part of our community. So when they were speaking Yiddish to my grandparents as the secret language and didn't want to teach it to us because they had been taught that you need to assimilate and teaching a second language is going to hold your kids back. My mother was like, well, in school they're teaching French or Spanish, so it would be good for you to take Spanish as a child. And I was already hanging out with my Puerto Rican friends, and I had my own secret language in learning Spanish. So it just was part of my DNA from childhood. Fast forward to as an adult, I didn't realize how much information I absorbed that was not necessarily being absorbed by a lot of other Americans throughout the United States. So this sort of idea that I never really used the phrase melting pot, but that I was in this cross-cultural reality as a child, that just was my norm. And then I realized when I moved out, my parents moved when I was 14 to Los Angeles, how segregated and siloed those communities were, whether it's a car culture. And then I started to work with corporate America, and I realized, which a lot of white male executives were in the Midwest, for example. Um, and again, there was not as much personal interaction with people from different cultures and colors and life experiences. So I just found that for me, it was not a rocket science kind of idea to understand how to talk about or learn about or listen to other groups. But I found that that wasn't often the experience of other people. And I found I could play a role, as I like to say, kind of packaged as I am. And I say that with humility. I realized that people would talk to me, white, particularly white people would talk to me, but not just white people, because sometimes it would be a Black person who wanted to understand the Latino community, or they started to understand that I might have sort of this bridge-like quality, this teachable moment ability to
Mhm.
be able to answer questions. I later understood that they need to be talking to people from the culture, not through me, etc. But we're
Right.
talking, the 80s, the 70s, the 80s, so I'm a 60s kid. I was born full age disclosure because age diversity is important too. I
Right.
was 1960, so
Okay, yeah. And I'm a kid from the 70s. And
yeah.
when I first met you, I thought that was so fascinating that you had this background, yet you are pretty much like a liaison in a way with corporate America to Latino and Black, so Black and Brown communities. And by you having grown up in a predominantly, Puerto Rican neighborhood, that kind of fueled your journey in a way, you know?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah. And
yeah.
and I even talk about structural racism. Like I didn't realize like the buildings I grew up in, they used to be referred to as the Jewish buildings. They're on like Grand Street, if you know New York at all, Grand Street and the FDR Drive. And then there were the projects and then there were the tenements. And when I heard the idea as an adult now, structural racism, I thought, wow, our buildings actually had inherent structural racism built into
Yeah.
them because they were called the Jewish buildings, but and they were built during the time in the 50s by Roosevelt during the WPA project. And they were to take like the Jews out of the Jewish ghetto and put them, but
Mhm.
fast forward, a lot of lawsuits started to happen because Jews were passing them on, Jews in general, but people who lived in that building were passing them on to their family members as opposed to opening them up to people of, different colors and cultures to compete for those apartments. And even my house in West Hollywood, I live in West Hollywood, California now. We have one of those deeds that has, I don't know if you've heard of these deeds,
Mhm.
so there are deeds in houses in Los Angeles that
Mhm.
say no Negroes, no Mongolians, which is what Asians used to be called,
Mhm.
no
Mhm.
Hebrews. Like they literally still
Listed
have
it.
the
It's
language.
it's still the language is still there.
It's
I would have
still, yeah,
thought by
yeah.
now that would have been removed, but that's still on there.
There
Wow.
people have to actually go to court to have it removed. Like when we bought our house, and this is, you look at it and it's like, oh, but this is old information. Then you're like, but it's on our deed. My husband's,
Right.
so
Yeah.
my husband's Afro-Latino. He's Black Latino, and I'm this white Jewish woman who technically neither one of us could legally live in that house in West Hollywood.
Wow. That is complete new information for me. That is still today,
Yeah,
you
to
know?
today. Yeah.
Wow.
It's
That's
I've just been recently doing some, I forget now, the name is escaping me of these leases, these deeds. But yeah, if you Google it, everybody, racial, I think they're called racial covenants, or there's a name for them. And basically it was what they had set up so that, and if the house was sold to a person who violated, was, of color or of those groups,
yeah.
it could be taken away. It literally could just be taken from them. So
Wow.
anyway,
I need
that's
to
a
do
whole
a
other
segment about that on my Substack because
deep.
I'm so fascinated. Because, of course, I knew like back in the day, but I just didn't know that it's still that you have to be active to say, I need this removed. So,
Correct.
wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Wow. Well, let's dive into talking about corporate and marketing. Um, actually, even before we get into that, let's talk about, currently, a lot of discord has been going on with the US and foreign countries, especially countries with brown people. Why is it important to have healthy international relationships?
Yeah, I mean, well, just a tiny bit of perspective. I think I should mention um, about 40 plus years ago, one of my first jobs out of college accidentally was working for a Cuban gentleman who was starting one of the first Hispanic advertising agencies in the United States. And so I started to immerse myself in not just the Puerto Rican community, which I had grown up around, but all of the Latino experience. And you particularly couldn't talk about the Latino experience in the United States and I'm going back to 1982 when I started in that field, without talking about international realities, right? Because the
Hmm.
consumers, of course, there were Latinos who were born in the United States, there were New Yorkers, there were people, second gen, and so on. But percentage wise, I started, there were about 8 million Latinos living in the United States in the early 1980s.
Hmm.
Um, there's about 60 plus million. So a lot of Latino consumerism is both US based and internationally based. So, just from a corporate standpoint, the world consumerism goes both directions. And then just from a human standpoint, I hope we've learned, clearly we haven't learned, but I hope we've learned that we are all connected, right? That the borders are a fictitious imposition of structure and territory. But the world is interconnected. The globe is interconnected. The air we breathe is interconnected. Birds. I just was bird watching and watching migrations, and how birds will show up here. I'm talking to you from Panama City, Panama, where I spend part of the year because my husband's Panamanian. And we must understand global dynamics, and because if we don't, sooner or later they will affect, we can't just keep thinking we're going to live in these like little bubbles and such. Yeah. So from a Latino specific centric standpoint, the Latino experience is both US based and throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, and Puerto Rico being US, um, as well as all of our experiences, our literature, some of the best literature in the world, some of the best arts forms and so on come from all over the world. So that's part of why there's so many reasons why we need to care about um, the world and
Right.
not.
And not just being so siloed and focused only on America, you know?
Yes, which, by the way, I even remind people, we've co-opted this word America, but it's a continent. It's the
It
America,
is.
So,
It's
so
not
this
just the
sort of,
US.
it's not like, oh, America, like,
Right, right. Yeah.
land of the free and home of the free. Hollywood did a really good job, and I know, again, working in advertising and marketing, sometimes you do feel like, well, that the narratives that get told that Hollywood or commercials have a hand in, they really do impact how we view the world and how we view people of color as the extras, as opposed to the principals, right? So,
Hmm.
that's a language, the Hollywood language or the commercial language that, whether we like to admit it or not, is subconsciously how we start to see the world, because we've been indoctrinated, not in any sort of, well, in some cases in a manipulative way, but in some cases just because that's the history of Hollywood. That's the
Hmm.
history of, of image making.
Right.
Uh, yeah,
And we worked really hard to make sure, as being a part of the Hollywood community, to have diversity, have, representation, across the board,
yeah.
whether if it's race, sexuality,
Mhm.
gender,
Mhm.
so yeah, it is just so important because it's not just about one particular sector of the population.
Right,
It's a
right.
huge collective.
And it statistically, and I'm bad at just throwing out statistics, but I can point you to them, which
Mhm.
we know that diverse thinking, diverse minds, diverse people bring more success. Like, so when let's say you want to argue a point and the other person is different than you actually will rise to a better solution when you have differences of opinion, right? It may not
Mhm.
be comfortable.
Mhm.
That's the part that I think people leave out of the equation is, by definition, diversity should be uncomfortable. It
Mhm.
should challenge your perceptions. It should open up blind spots that you were like, oh, I never saw that before. That's a little different. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. that being comfortable with being uncomfortable
Mm-hmm.
is what you have to lean into to get to the good stuff. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you're just going to always back up or point fingers or go like, oh, I knew that wasn't going to work out because, we're so different or that person is this way or that way, then you're never going to get to the increased sales or the increased ideas, the more innovation, the more creativity that is proven to come from different perspectives kind of crashing up against each other and then figuring out how to go for the better thing.
Right. Yes, of course, of course. So, what inspired you to specialize in marketing in the Latino and Black communities, and what have has been the biggest challenges in getting corporations to go beyond performative representation?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you honestly, I accidentally fell into, so I was a theater major,
Mhm.
and a writer, and I needed a part-time job, and I was out of college, and I answered an ad in the New York Times for something called a Girl Friday, which was what they used to call women, when we did sort of like a little bit of everything, some bookkeeping, some writing, some thising, some thating. But because I was a actor and a writer, and I started working for this Cuban gentleman who was starting a Hispanic ad agency. He took me on, he had me write the presentations, and then I started to go out to corporate America. And I started to present. And going back to what I had said about just what was natural to me from my childhood, I started to understand that there was this big misunderstanding or lack of understanding or willful ignorance. Like it falls into categories. There are people who legitimately want to understand and don't understand. There
Mhm.
are people who are willfully ignorant and just,
Mhm.
have decided not to learn anything. But I saw that, first of all, I've always loved the Latino community, and I've always been just very appreciative of being able to weave in and out of that community as I share my experience. My now husband, then boyfriend, came after my job, and everyone's always thinking that, oh, you're into Latino marketing because of your husband. It's like, no, I was into Latino marketing before my husband. I
Mhm.
happened to meet my husband, who's a Shakespearean trained actor, who's Panamanian in
Mhm.
the theater. And so then my personal life also expanded in terms of the Afro-Latino community. And so I already knew that I needed to correct as much as possible stereotyping. It just when you're, I have a million blind spots, and that's why they're called blind spots. We all have we have our blind spots. So I'm not
Mhm.
here to say like I could see everything,
Right.
but I really could see when, because people would also tell me offensive things. And again, that has to do with like being white and people assuming that I'm going to side with them. Like, oh, like one, I remember once it was at I won't say the brand. It was a major pizza company. And we were with all their franchisees, and we were looking at the statistics of the increase in population of the Latino community. And you hear like one person just whispered to me, like, oh, I'm gonna call my real estate agent and move. It's like white
Mm-hmm.
franchise, and people
Yeah.
would say these like, ha ha ha, and you're first as a account service person, you're kind of trained to like buddy up to the client. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like, well, wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
That just is like a clash with my values and a clash with how the point of this whole, if you want to spend money to reach consumers, it shouldn't just be about, oh, because I want their money. It should be about because I really want to understand and appreciate them as human beings. So I
Mm-hmm.
started to get very vocal. I was kind of
Yeah.
known. I used to write a lot of articles for Ad Age.
Mm-hmm.
I was just known for being vocal. And honestly, I
Yeah.
just, because I didn't intend to be in advertising, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have that sort of like fear of, oh, I'm going to get fired and I'll never make it in this industry. I really didn't care.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trying to quit the industry, but the industry kept being like, oh, she's interesting. Like she took, and I was encouraged by people of color who would say to me, hey, that was really helpful what you just did, because
Mm-hmm.
we need more people from your community. to
Hmm.
speak up because
Right.
we're always speaking up. And then they be just like, oh, angry Black woman or, oh,
Hmm.
Latino complaining or whatever. It's like we need people like you to stand up because otherwise we don't really know what your values are. So that started to make to give me the I don't know if it was I don't even want to call it courage. I just think maybe I should, my parents have passed away, but I should give a shout out to my parents because
Hmm.
they didn't have to raise me with these values, but they did. They and the Jewish community is going through, it's rough times,
Hmm.
etc.
Yeah, across the board, you know?
Across the board,
Yeah.
exactly. Across the
Hmm.
board, the world is having rough times. But, like the Jewish community often is seen as like a very cloistered community, like, oh, your husband's Afro-Latino. What did your parents think about that? My parents were fine as long as we were happy and not hurting and in love and not hurting everybody.
Hmm.
Those are the kind of parents I was fortunate enough to have. Not everybody got dealt that, and from any culture, there's all sorts
Right.
of, even within the Latino community, let's be
Right.
honest, between, other groups, there's
Right.
internal colorism, there's internal racism.
Right.
Nobody,
Absolutely.
yeah, nobody has the
No one's
own,
not touched by this, you
yeah,
know?
exactly,
Yeah, by
exactly.
biases and so forth, you know?
Yeah, yeah. But
So,
I just think to answer your question, I stayed in an industry that I didn't intend to be in because I really felt that there was a beautiful like opportunity to bring forward cultural marketing and cultural, and that also had to do with storytelling and who and what stories got told and who
mhm,
as actors and producers and directors got to be. So I felt like I was part of a movement and it's still going on of people who really cared about putting Latino community, and then I started to my starting point was in the Latino community, which includes all of the groups. So that's one of those bucket words that contains, everything from Afro-Latinos from the Dominican Republic, all the groups. Two, then I wound up working, I had my own agency, which was Latino centric. And then I wound up working, and I still work with a group called Walton Isaacson, which is led by Aaron Walton and is part owned by Magic Johnson. And that works both in Black marketing, Latino marketing, and LGBTQ marketing, and all cultures, cross-cultural marketing, regardless of uh, race and sexual orientation and so on and so forth.
right.
So I think, yeah, even though I keep saying like I want to be an actress and a writer, which I am, I'm that too. So, I'm doing that too, and I've changed my role in the agency world to have time to do that. But I didn't want to leave that world because I feel like there's still so much work to be done.
Mhm.
And here we are going backward instead of forward, but I'll
Mhm.
just say that.
And before I move on with more questions about corporate, but this still
Okay.
ties into it because when you talked about speaking up,
Mhm.
hearing offensive things, and being a white woman, white Jewish woman, in these environments, what would you say to other, white people who are surrounded by this and they want to speak up? What advice would you give them?
Um,
Or
I
how,
speak.
or how to navigate it, you know?
Yeah,
So,
it's easy
yeah.
to say, well, speak up. I mean,
Mhm.
it's funny because it's not funny. It's kind of, it's poignantly funny. Because right when the George Floyd 20, there was a lot of, now talk about performative. There was a lot of performative scrambling to like write statements and this and that. And I
Mhm.
remember thinking to myself, oh, because I've spent so much time in the Latino community and with my husband's family and all of this. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, white people I had some conversation with, I think, a neighbor. So white people are just exhausting. And then when I heard myself say that,
Mhm.
I said to myself, well, wait a minute. If I'm exhausted talking to white people, imagine what people of color are like.
Right.
Exactly, and I realized like, wait, whether I like it or not, it is my responsibility if I'm going to not be performative or be like, oh, look at me, I hang out with the Latinos, or
Mm-hmm.
know a bunch of rap songs, or I'm a Beyonce,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. It's like all that performative stuff. It's like, no, if I'm genuinely care about the people I'm talking about, family members, friends, people I work with, society, people I don't know, it's my responsibility to say, hey, I don't have all the answers, oh, person that looks like me,
Mm-hmm.
but I can tell you this, it's not personal, but it is the history of the United States to put white dominance as someone told me to use this word instead of privilege, they told me use superpower. And
Mm-hmm.
because, I realized like I kept, I also used the word privilege, and then you'd see people be like, well, I grew up poor. I grew up,
Mm-hmm.
and the language, there is no perfect language, but you don't need to like die on the sword for the language. You need to have results, right? So if someone could hear it better, it's like, you know what? As a white person, you are gifted in the United States, or you have been granted, whether you just have been with
Mm-hmm.
a a dominant color that happens to be received again via Hollywood, via whatever, in a
Mm-hmm.
different way than any other person of color. And when
Yeah.
you start to understand that, and you can make a choice whether you're going to just keep that to yourself and benefit yourself, or whether you're going to listen, learn, and try to play a role in transforming the narrative so that you're not always like the speak up. Like I actually had to also learn to stop speaking up. So I was in a situation where speaking up was what I did. But I realized like, oh, you know what? Sometimes I don't leave room for other people to speak up. And it's
Mm-hmm.
real important to, and so it's not about, sometimes people would be like, well, you're holding yourself back. And it's like, you don't have to take stuff away in order to give it to someone else. There's sort of this scarcity mentality that happens in these
Mm-hmm.
rooms.
Yeah.
And I think it's about helping other people understand that there's enough to go around. Like,
Mm-hmm.
hasn't affected my life in any way but positive ways, to be able to say, hey, I I need to not always be the person in the room who answers the question, or take an opportunity that perhaps could go to somebody else, from the community that I'm not from.
Mm-hmm.
If it's going to be about the community, like, yeah, I could talk about this, that, and the other thing, but my conversation on the Latino community is intellectually driven,
Mm-hmm.
objectively driven, but um, it's not who I am, right? I'm not, what is that woman's name? Rachel Dolezal. Remember Rachel Dolezal? She was that teacher. She's a white teacher. She wound up like
Oh, with the
doing
braids? Yeah.
the
Yes, I remember.
braids,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
The
Mm-hmm.
braids.
Right.
And I once wrote an essay, the title of which was Ally or a Lie. And it was
Mm-hmm.
about, because I realized when the Rachel Dolezal thing, I was going to Antioch for my master's degree, Antioch, Los Angeles, which has a social justice sort of skew to it. And I remember when that happened, and I thought, wow, I thought I'm one step away from, like, if I'm not careful, it's easy to fall into, because even people from the community, oh, you're Latina, you're an honorary Latina,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, but I'm not Latina, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's be clear. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to be pretending to be who I'm not, because it will get me whatever. And I
Right.
remember this decision about ally, like, okay, to be an ally or ally, like, or am I just going to like do the performative part? And I
Mm-hmm.
think, and that's always something I'm conscious of, and I try to encourage um yeah, I try to encourage other people to also just listen and learn because, we use words like Black, Latino, Asian, white, even. But within each of those buckets, there's like West Indian, Black West Indians
Mhm.
are different than African Black Africans, than
Hmm.
Black people from New York, than Black people from Mississippi.
Hmm.
So there's no like one like, oh, the Black experience,
Right. We're not monolithic. Hmm.
Exactly, exactly. And then that one Black person in the room, that's a problem with advertising and marketing people is like they often would put like the one Black person in the room and go, so how do you do your hair? What
Hmm.
products do you use? Okay, well then you are now the poster child for all things, Black, or the Latino person in the room is like, oh, we have our specialist, our single person who now
Hmm.
speaks for everybody.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
by the way, white people, while I'm talking to white people, there's culture, like for some reason, I know why, when you're the dominant culture and the US didn't set it, sort of structured this way. But white people have culture. Like I said before, Irish people weren't always considered white,
Right.
Italians weren't always considered white, Jews were not. So there's there's all sorts of exploration of and now Eastern European backgrounds of all sorts of white backgrounds, but also now interracial marriage. And I don't know this, I do know the statistics, but I can never remember them when I
Yeah.
have to. But statistically, there's
Hmm.
also a rise in the cross-cultural relationships, which means that we have children who are, what are they supposed to pick on the census? I know that's like also a thing, is that the census is always trying to bucket, like,
Hmm.
oh, wait, now there's all these white people. And it's like, well, people can have two racial identities. People can have more than two racial identities.
Right.
So
Hmm.
all of that has to get relooked at. And I think the advertising industry needs to rethink how they sort of, target or put boxes around people, because yes, there are cultural drivers, but they're not the same as they were, 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, I completely agree with that. So one thing I want to know,
Mhm.
how do you navigate the tension between corporate profit-driven motives and the need for authentic cultural engagement?
That's a great question. Because at the end of the day, the reality about marketing and advertising and companies is that they're profit driven, right? So if there's not some sort of profit fueling the initiative, it doesn't fit into to the to what marketing is all about. That being said, authenticity, it's to help companies understand that authenticity fuels profit, right? To not make it an either or proposition.
Hmm.
Authenticity fuels profit, especially now, especially with social media, especially with content creators, right? Because you can smell inauthentic everything a mile away. Like that's so it's become so personalized that it's very easy to, it's not that easy. I mean, people can still con you, but authenticity and the creators and so on. So companies who really start to understand that by by loosening up and allowing their brand to be in the hands of people who authentically understand how to connect with a particular community is
Hmm.
going to drive profit. It's
Hmm.
not a separate, like, oh no, we need profit. It's also not, people started to get into this like, well, we're about profit, but we can have purpose.
Hmm.
And it sounds nice, right? It's a pretty thing. It sounds like there's profit and there's purpose. And it is great when a company actually does invest um, in purpose-driven initiatives, right? That
Hmm.
are that are good for the community. But the third P is performative, right? So one thing is like, oh, we're driving profit, but we're going to put some of our monies into something purpose driven because it will make us look like better corporate citizens.
Mm-hmm.
But to the authenticity, if that's not authentic, if you just picked some random like what's the hot purpose driven thing of the moment, and
Mm-hmm.
you just put your name on it, and then when when Budweiser, worked with, I forget someone from the trans community, and then there was all that backlash, and then they didn't support
Mm-hmm.
that person. It's like uh, it, so you're going to wind up hurting your brand.
Mm-hmm.
So you really need to, if you're not a brand that can make choices based on values,
Mm-hmm.
um, just don't.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
gonna
Right.
hurt. Like really,
Right.
like
Just
there's
don't just
nobody's
yeah, just don't do
asking
it.
you, right? Just don't do it. Like honestly,
Right.
it really is as simple as that. It's like do not jump on the we're gonna be cultural and authentic bandwagon. And
Mm-hmm.
I saw that happening with the DEI stuff. I mean, I was asked to write a bunch of stuff. And I was like, yeah, I think that's part of the problem that you're asking me to,
Right.
to
Yeah.
write some stuff behind the scenes. Is like I think you need to understand like it's not like, oh, can you write some pretty words, oh,
Right.
you know the subject, like write some stuff. It's like no, just don't do it. Nobody needs the voice of yet another brand saying something that in the near future they're just going to
Mm-hmm.
walk away from. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
no.
You bring up DEI and
Mhm.
I feel like some corporations just jump the gun on DEI, initiatives. And in your work, since you're, behind the scenes, you're in marketing, are you seeing them rethink their rash decisions? Any regrets?
Uh, there's, I once did like one of those, when you make like a tea and you put little words in each box. Because it's sort of like profile, it's sort of like saying what kind of clients are there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had like trial, denial, enlightened, and frightened. And
Mm-hmm.
so, so
Mm-hmm.
you had some, and you still like in this D&I conversation. You do have those companies who were frightened but tried, right? And I give those companies credit. They're like, I don't know, we haven't been doing this, but we really feel like we need to be, and we're going to put our foot into the DE&I world, but we're going to do it slowly. We're going to do it right. We're going to hire real people with real qualifications to build some sort of internal understanding, and and so there are people right now who are afraid. They were afraid going in, but they set it up in a way that aligned with the fact that they weren't big risk takers. They were new to the thing, and they're staying the course. They're massaging language. So they're like not like it has to be DEI. First of all, I have a problem. I had a problem in 2016. My problem goes back to 2016. The minute you have these acronyms that can get thrown around so easily that they lose even what they meant, it's a
Sorry, yeah, I
problem.
was muted. But yeah, but
Oh,
what they mean,
yeah,
they lose
exactly.
the whole intention behind them. Yeah.
Exactly. And lately I've been telling people, please don't just call, and I should check myself when I say this too. Please don't just like shortcut it. Like we have time for you to say diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like you're not saving that much time by saying DEI, right? You can say fast, you can say diversity, equity, inclusion, because I guarantee you that most people are not going to say, "Oh, that's terrible diversity," or
Right.
"Oh, we don't want equity." They still can't, wrap their mind around the difference between equality and equity. But okay, they're in the zone, and inclusion.
Hmm.
When they say DEI, then it's like, "Oh, you're a DEI hire," and all this like.
Hmm.
But then again, it's sort of like, well. what did I read today? Definitely earned it. I think it was Jasmine Crockett who was like saying,
Hmm.
so it's
Yeah.
like also like, why are we so afraid of language? Like it's just words. It's like little children. And that's why, again, I go back to my childhood. We used to call each other all, let me be clear about the Lower East Side.
Hmm.
I made it sound like we were all kumbaya
Hmm.
and everything. But like all the groups used to call each other names, like slurs, names. And I don't know, it was equal opportunity name calling. It was
Hmm.
just sort of the spirit of the Lower East Side. Maybe I'm like romancing the problem from the 60s, but there was a period where we all kind of got along, but we still could call each other names.
Hmm.
Um, Now it's like, oh, they're calling us names and we need to like give up our words. So you don't
Hmm.
have to give up your words. You can
Right.
keep your words.
Hmm.
Or you can change your words, but this is my new phrase. I think I invented it, but maybe someone else did. Actions, not acronyms. That is like I want my little t-shirt to say actions, not
Hmm.
acronyms. I don't care what acronym you want to put on it,
Hmm.
as long as your actions are aligned with moving this positive narrative forward. And there were things that needed to be done in the DEI space and the diversity, equity, and inclusion space that even the most polished practitioners knew were like, hey, we need to start changing some of the language around this, or we need to. So to answer your question, I hope I've answered some of it.
Yes.
There are those, I do want to sort of condemn those who are, there are those who I would lump Target in that bucket.
Hmm.
Um, who really like did like, wow, that was like,
Hmm.
what is that called? Whiplash, where it's
Hmm.
like, wow, y'all were like, hey, look at all our, black product lines and oh, the
Hmm.
t-shirts and oh, our LGBT stuff. And then it was like, oh, get that stuff out of here. And,
Hmm. Hmm.
and no, we can't support, it's like, and someone told me, of course, Costco is being held up as you see it on TikTok and as a leader, Dick's Sporting Goods, Ben and Jerry's, Ben and Jerry's has always been that kind of brand.
Hmm. They've
But
always
when I
been.
said,
Hmm.
when I talk about Costco, somebody said to me, well, they they didn't come forward. They just came forward because the lawyers were they came forward when they had to come forward. But I think you need to give people some. Who was it? Was it you who used this phrase? Somebody used the phrase grace and space with me recently, and I
Hmm.
and I like that phrase
Right.
because
It wasn't me, but yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
I just think that sometimes we're too rigid around stuff. It's like, okay, so they came forward,
Hmm.
okay?
Hmm.
Like, oh, but they didn't come forward at exactly the moment where you wanted
Right.
them to come
But
forward.
we recognize that they, and again, I can't speak for all Black people, but from what I'm hearing, that because they actually did come forward and say, yes, we're for all people, that, you know, we're going to shop there. So, and I know many groups that have been talking about, yes, we will support them and we will shop there because they had the balls to
Yeah,
actually say, yes, this is what we're doing. So,
exactly.
yeah. And that's
Exactly.
what, the other companies need to really say because, hey, we're huge spenders. We shop, 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 shop.
Yeah.
So for them to not, for the ones that did, denounce it and say, "Oh, we're not going to do that anymore." Um, it's just like, okay, well, you don't want our dollars, so yeah.
Exactly. And what is it exactly that we're so scared of and so in denial about? The thing about this idea of like when this pejorative use of D and I hire is used, I always remind people that that burden is on the hirer. The people, if you are an HR person that doesn't know how to choose people,
Hmm.
that's on you.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
not on anybody
Yeah.
that
Right.
came, through. And I think part of what happened in the performative space is this idea that somehow quotas that was always a red flag when companies that went from zero to whatever percentage they went, had to keep showing like look at our percentage. Look at
Mm-hmm.
how many of these we have. Look at how many of those. See, like I work with companies that were already diverse, right? So they were always like, well, because there would be like let's say you had to show your progress, and it's like, yeah, but we're already diverse. Like, so our incremental progress is not relevant. It doesn't add up to the same. But these other companies, like say the ad industry, let's use that.
Mm-hmm.
The ad industry in general, there used to be, like I said, I'm a specialist in Latino marketing. I work for a Latino marketing agency, advertising. But the other agencies are always called general market.
Mm-hmm.
They're always this sort of like,
Mm-hmm.
and at the end of the day, if you really think about it, they're sort of like white marketers, but they don't want to call themselves white marketers. Like,
Mm-hmm.
'cause it's like, no, we're not white market. We have a lot of different people, but your dominant target has been white marketing. Like, and there's honestly, to me, there's like, just own it.
Right.
But, but so if you looked at their employee bases, they were lacking diversity and people of different, and so they started to be like, well, look at our percentages and the quotas, which then sets up this like false narrative that somehow, oh, white males are no longer going to get jobs, and their opportunities are going away and we must stand up, and then the other thing, and I'll that was what my article was about in 2016. Someone said that the white women were going to be the like the saviors, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were going to solve for diversity. And I was like, because I was seeing it and hearing it, I was like, no, they're not. Like my experiences, not only aren't they, but they may be worse in some ways because also white women are the children of white men, and they kind of feel like they're next in line
Mm-hmm.
for like oh well, we didn't have the same opportunities. That's the other thing I didn't like about diversity and inclusion, and I'll stop, which is everybody started to get into the bucket, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so first it was like African Americans and Latinos, and then some Asian, and then veterans, and then women, and then people with disability. And I'm all those groups have, but what I started to see was what I called adversity instead of diversity and inclusion, adversity and confusion.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Yeah.
Because everybody that was in the diversity room was someone other than a straight white male. So the notion being that you had something of an adverse, you had some quality. You were
Mm-hmm.
either a woman, you were a woman of color, you had a disability, you were a veteran. Something about you was adverse to this sort of standard of white maleness, straight maleness, and confusion, which is, yeah, what does this mean to include me in what? And why do
Mm-hmm.
you hold the keys? Like,
Right.
why we need to blow this, excuse my language, can I say shit? We need
Mm-hmm.
to blow this shit up
Mm-hmm.
and start over again. Like, there need not be someone who's so centered that they are the includer. That still has like this sort of
Exclusion
patriarchal
element to it.
exclusion. That's what
Right.
that's what
Mm-hmm.
I recently told people. I said the only reason, because everyone now wants to use the word inclusion. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's the word of the moment is inclusion, inclusion, inclusion. I said the only reason we're talking about inclusion is because it's it's because of exclusion.
Right,
So
exactly. Everyone's been, if you haven't been white male straight, then everyone else has been excluded. So, yeah.
exactly. So
Mhm.
now we're like inclusion, but inclusion still, what we haven't solved for, inclusion into a still structurally, we're pretending for the moment just to get
Mhm.
by and to
Mhm.
keep that inclusion. Like I remember when Obama got elected the first time, and everyone, not everyone, but there were those who were like, post-racial, we're post-racial. And there
Yeah.
was this moment where people like wanted to really believe that that
Yeah.
was a thing, or that that was even a good thing, because that's
Hmm.
another thing.
Right,
I
because
used to,
then you're not identifying with, 'cause I think we discussed this earlier, not on this call, but how when you have used the term of, oh, I don't see color. And
Exactly.
so, and when people use that term, it's you're ignoring my journey, other people's journey, or
Yeah,
people look like me or other, Asian, indigenous or Latin people, that you're ignoring our experience in this country. So, yeah.
100%. And that was one of the things that in talking to, white people in about blind spots. So one of
Hmm.
the things was this idea that I know you think that saying I'm colorblind is like a nice, it's like a nice thing, but
Hmm.
in fact, it's a negation. First of all, there you need to get your eyes checked, right? Because there's
Hmm.
like to deny color. And second of all, it's like who are you to decide that, no. So I would say like what you need to do is get color comfortable. The
Hmm.
problem with the way we've been raised in the US is that there's a discomfort. There's like a lot of the narratives that white people have and even black people get the same narratives because
Hmm.
the books that children grow up in is
Hmm.
like, well, there's the slavery story, right? So
Hmm.
okay, well, let's start with the fact that now I have the slavery story in my head, and color is about slavery, and there's a guilt thing associated with that. Like it wasn't me, but my ancestors maybe, and so everyone's like uncomfortable. And it's like
Hmm.
color comfortable, color confidence. Like why is color? Why would we? And that's why the world. Getting back to your also question about
Hmm.
the original question about why the world is important is statistically there are more black and brown people in the world
Hmm.
than, so we have lived in this Eurocentric, because when we talk about the world, the US tends to make it as if Europe somehow is like the big part. The maps are all drawn funny and we talk
Hmm.
about like European history,
It's
way
like
that
it's the ideal.
it's the
And
idea.
right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And there's also this notion that all countries that are of color, that predominantly of color, Africa, Latin America, are third world countries.
Right. So
Um,
not true.
and
Hmm.
yeah, and so there's also that sort of, I mean, like I say, I'm here in Panama. It's like a major city, and I still have people asking me like, oh, how can you, are you okay? You're from New York. How are you? Like, there's a subway in Panama City, by the way. But also I used to think, back in the day before the internet, you're like, oh, people don't know. Like they haven't traveled. I've had the benefit of traveling. But now we have like Google everything where you can
Hmm.
actually look at a street corner, like you can look at a skyline.
Yeah.
Like now that's willful ignorance. That's why I come back to this idea that there are certain things that, yes, let's be grace and space and teachable moment, and like not everyone's going to know, and I
Hmm.
don't know everything. But then there's just like, oh, you don't really want to know, do you?
Right. Yeah.
Want to
There's
ask
that.
ignorant questions because you could have checked that out before you could have been like, hey, before I ask this stupid question, like they used to say, there are no stupid questions. I do believe that there are. Or at least you
Or
should
less informed.
less informed. Thank you. That's much better. That is much better. You should, yeah, because don't, yeah, do some work. I think that's part of also what I say to people is don't expect it all, because that's also emotional labor for people of color to constantly be telling you what their culture is or isn't about. It's sort of like, oh, well, I hung out with, these
Hmm.
people and I asked them all these questions, and that's lovely. Like, it's good if you want to answer the questions, but it's also not your job as a
Hmm.
person of color to answer white people's questions, right?
Hmm.
It's like
And that's where, going back to what you said about exhausting,
it's
that's
exhausting.
where, a lot of the exhaustion comes from. So,
Exactly. So, and I'm sure I exhaust people, but I think it's just about trying, caring, and not being performative. Like trying to really, how would you like? How do I want to be treated? It's sort of some of it feels simple, like like, wow, if someone, I mean, I'm not like particularly Jewish. Like I have a complicated Jewish history. My mother hated religion. My father was Orthodox. But like to explain that to people is it's hard, right?
Yeah.
It's hard. Like I can tell you what growing up kosher is and how my mother used to take me for spare ribs, which was a bad thing to do, and told me to lie to like I have this complicated Jewish.
Right.
But I'm like, oh, if I don't want people bombarding me with questions or I mean, I don't mind answering a few of them, but I'm like, there are other ways. And personal experience is the best, like
Mhm.
travel, um, go to communities that aren't your community,
Mhm.
be uncomfortable. Like, I think that's part of it is people like to think they know stuff. And when you go into a community that you don't know how to read the room,
Right.
um, you don't know why certain things are happening, but that's okay, like, but you will, like, immersion is like respectful immersion. I
Hmm.
know that's
Hmm.
like a long, it doesn't happen overnight, but I
Hmm.
don't know
But
why we,
but a little bit, bit by bit,
yeah, bit by bit,
and
bit by,
so, and the small actions. And
yeah.
that's with, and actually by you saying that, it really ties into the whole civics thing that I'm doing here too. Because when you engage in communities that you're not familiar with, explore. And so, and I have one question before we wrap up, which goes into the civic topic too, and ties with corporations. But what are some simple yet impactful actions individuals and corporations can take to encourage civic engagement, especially in Black and Brown communities?
I think volunteerism is, I think corporations have, um, first of all, they have a lot of money. But money, but money doesn't create civic behavior, right? So it's
Hmm.
easy to say, oh, they have money, so they should pour money. But what they should do is they should um incentivize um their employee bases to do something that contributes to some aspect of civic volunteerism and give them the option and subsidize them, right? And don't take it out of their, give them a few hours. Like there's so much time we spend at work
Hmm.
um that is not all utilized,
Hmm.
productively, but it could also create great cultures. I know companies can't nor should they take like, oh, wear this position or that position. Like they need to be bipartisan. They need to well reflect their values. I don't, there's things that they could be doing that isn't like putting money into certain PACs and stuff. But
Hmm.
I think that um giving the employees an opportunity to move their hours into the community and bring and that's a beautiful way also to also expand if you're not from the communities of color is to get involved in something that's going to impact a community of color or go, create a buddy system, create a
Hmm.
mentoring program, that is civically related.
Hmm.
So that's one because local government, again, I know companies can't necessarily drive local, but they can also sponsor,
Right.
they can
Hmm.
sponsor voting registration. They can sponsor, civic education, speaking panels in
Hmm.
ways that, again, um, don't cross over the corporate sort of threshold of what's fair for an
Hmm.
entire company. But yeah, there's all sorts of like in-kind and structural pieces, because a lot of groups need space. Like I'm a big arts, like I believe in civics through the arts, right?
Hmm.
So storytellers, I think people learn um through storytelling. Well, this is sort of related, but I'm gonna
Hmm.
when I started to go back for my master's in writing, I also realized how books we read um, are like that. If the characters or the narrator isn't defined as a person of color, they're presumed white. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's just suddenly realizing, like, oh, why do I presume that? Like, why, and maybe I should be reading books by other authors, and maybe I should like get that's like a way. If you can't get to other communities, but you can immerse yourself in the writing and in the online presence of groups. And I think civically, like there's content creators for whom civic, like yourself,
Mm-hmm.
um, for whom civic conversations are bipartisan, are not about demonizing anybody, but
Mm-hmm.
they are about, well, if you say you're so patriotic and we all want like the country to work in a sort of a unified fashion, and I think we can all agree it's quite divided at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, oh, yeah, I was just going to say, even here in Panama, for example, there's one simple act that happens here when you pass someone on the street that to me is part of a civics education, which is
Mm-hmm.
everybody says buenas. Everyone says hi,
Mm-hmm.
hello. I don't know the person I'm passing, but just that moment of human connection with a stranger, knowing that it's like, hey, we are part of something called community, um, changes your psychology about strangers. They're
Right.
no longer strangers, and I think companies could um provide the infrastructure to to get the arts or other educational edutainment. Companies are good at edutainment, and I think, educating through entertainment is a valuable thing to teach. Frankly, what those of us who are older may have forgotten, because if you don't keep it up, you forget certain aspects. Like I'm getting a new education about how our country works. And then for people who are born outside of the United States, for people who speak other languages, there's all sorts of ways companies can create documentaries, can hire
Mm-hmm.
filmmakers, content creators, but with a civics minded agenda.
Right.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's great. And um, I any final thoughts? Was that's really great to end on right there, but any other final thoughts
Yeah,
that you want to
no,
mention?
I think that is a good place to end, because I truly find your subject matter of great importance, and I don't hear a lot of people speaking about the through line with again how many touch points. You're speaking about diversity, you're
Hmm.
coming at the conversation and allowing me to be part of that as uh with a whole spectrum of perspectives. And I think that reminds us how expansive the word civics can be. That it's not just,
Absolutely. It's not just
memorizing
about
history.
government. It's
Exactly.
community, it's how we interact with people, being citizens, and being civil, to one another and on top of it. So, yeah,
Right
we're
in the
we're
word.
we're all in this together. And so, but I thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you. Is there anything that I know you didn't necessarily have any links or anything like that, but is it people can support your work? I know you're creative. Is there
I
anything that
am. I have a cat. I'm fascinated by my viral cat. I have a got 13,000. He's got 13,000 Instagram followers, and he brings people joy. So I'm just going to shout out Brewski the cat,
Okay.
at Brewski the cat. He had some video go like millions of views. I also mentioned Walton Isaacson. People should check out the work that Walton Isaacson does. I am part of that team, but the team is doing amazing work with the Ad Council and Stand Up to Cancer and all sorts of corporate, but also important work in the community, in communities of color and other communities. Um, yeah, and you can always reach me on LinkedIn at Rochelle Newman-Carrasco. I have a website that has my writing on it at rochelle-newman.com. So thanks for, oh, and my husband, if anybody's I'll just, he's an actor. So if anyone wants to, if anyone's a Blood In, Blood Out fan, which is a film that was done 30 years ago and has a cult classic following, he was in that movie, Carlos Carrasco. He was in Speed with Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves. And yeah, and he's a proud American and Panamanian. So
Oh, great.
oh,
And just go ahead. Sorry.
no, I just want to say I was gonna make a Panama Canal reference because we it's like you can't even get away from US politics because the Panama Canal is
Right.
also on the radar, but I just won't say much about that.
Well, give me all of those links that you mentioned, and I drop them in the below of this video so people
Okay,
can be able to connect with you. And again,
I will
thank you
do.
so much. God, I
Thank
can
you.
talk to you forever
I
about
can
all of
meet
this
you.
stuff.
You asked me.
Maybe another time we'll get
Pleasure.
together and discuss even further.
I
So,
would love to do that. All right.
yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.